I still have that little brass shim in my top drawer. It's just a scrap of metal, really. Most folks would throw it in the trash without a second thought, but to me, it's the reason I'm sitting here in this armchair at 92 years old, breathing the air of a free country. Every time I open that drawer to get my reading glasses, I see it catching the light. It's a reminder that back in 1944, the difference between coming home and staying forever in a ditch in Belgium wasn't some grand strategy from a general in a warm office. It was a greasy mechanic named Miller and a modification that would have landed us all in a military prison if the brass had ever found out. We were near the Hurtgen forest, right on the edge of the Siegfried line. It was cold. Not just winter cold, but the kind of damp, soul-crushing chill that gets inside your bones and stays there until you feel like your very marrow has turned to slush. We were tired. We were hungry. But mostly, we were frustrated with our equipment. The M3 half-tracks we were using were supposed to be the workhorses of the infantry, but in that Belgian mud and the freezing rain, they were becoming death traps. The official manuals said they could handle the terrain, but the engineers who wrote those manuals never spent a night shivering in a foxhole while the German 88s whistled overhead. The problem was the fuel lines and the carburetors. In that extreme cold, the fuel would thicken up and the moisture in the air would freeze inside the intakes. You'd be in the middle of a tactical retreat or a sudden push, and the engine would just cough, sputter, and die. It happened to a buddy of mine, Sam. We were trying to move a squad under fire, and his engine just quit. He sat there, cranking and cranking, while the mortar rounds started walking their way toward his position. He didn't make it out. The official report said mechanical failure due to extreme weather conditions. We called it what it was, a design flaw that was killing us. Then there was Miller. Miller was a corporal, a scrawny kid from a garage in Detroit who smelled permanently of diesel and Lucky Strikes. He didn't care much for the army way of doing things. He used to say that the men who designed our gear were real smart, but they weren't the ones who had to fix it with a pair of pliers and a prayer in the middle of a firefight. Miller started tinkering. He spent his nights under the hoods of those half-tracks while the rest of us were trying to catch a few minutes of sleep. He found a way to reroute a portion of the exhaust heat directly back into the fuel intake and the battery housing using scavenged copper tubing he'd stripped from a bombed-out brewery in a nearby village. It was completely against regulations. It was illegal in every sense of the military code. If an inspector had seen it, they would have called it destruction of government property. They told us that any unauthorized modification would lead to a court-martial. The brass was obsessed with the idea that the equipment had to stay exactly as it was shipped from the factory. They said Miller's mod would cause the engines to overheat, or worse, explode. But Miller just looked at me and said, "Henry, would you rather have a truck that might overheat in an hour, or a truck that won't start right now when the Krauts are coming over that ridge?" I didn't have an answer for him then. I just knew I wanted to live. The Miller mod, as we called it, was our little secret. We only did it to 3 of our vehicles at first. We hid the copper piping with old canvas rags and smeared them with grease to make them look like they'd always been there. We knew we were playing a dangerous game, not just with the enemy, but with our own side. There's a certain kind of fear you carry when you know you're breaking the rules to survive. It's a heavy weight, but it's not as heavy as the weight of a coffin. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The real test came about a week later. The Germans had launched a localized counterattack near a small crossroads that we were supposed to hold. It was one of those mornings where the fog was so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. Everything was quiet, that eerie kind of quiet that usually means something bad is about to happen. Then, we heard the rumble. It wasn't our tanks. It was the low guttural growl of German armor. We got the order to relocate, and fast. The ground was a soup of frozen mud and slush. One by one, the squads tried to start their half-tracks. I remember the sound of those starters whining in the cold. Nothing. The official factory-standard vehicles were freezing up. The guys were frantic, pouring hot water over the engines, banging on the starters, cursing the engineers in Detroit. But Miller's 3 illegal machines? They turned over on the first try. That low rumble of the engine starting up was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. We didn't wait. We started loading the men from the other squads onto our modified trucks. We were way over the weight limit, another violation of the manual. But nobody cared about the manual when the first 80mm shell impacted the trees 100 yards away. I was in the lead vehicle with Miller. He was grinning, his face smeared with soot, clutching the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him on this earth. We were hauling 2 squads worth of men, plus crates of ammunition we couldn't afford to leave behind. The engine was working harder than it ever had. I could smell the heat, a strange metallic scent that made me worry Miller was right about the overheating. But the needle on the temperature gauge stayed just below the red line. The exhaust heat was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, keeping the fuel flowing and the battery alive while every other vehicle in the unit was sitting there like a frozen monument to the official design. As we pulled away, I looked back and saw one of the non-modified trucks. The driver was still in his seat, slumped over. He'd stayed too long trying to get the engine to catch. It was a sight that never leaves you, the silhouette of a man who did everything by the book, and the book failed him. We made it to the secondary line of defense just as the German scouts reached the crossroads. If we hadn't had those modified engines, 40 of us would have been captured or killed right there in the mud. When we finally reached the assembly area, a major came walking over. He was one of those guys who kept his uniform pressed even in the field. He looked at our half-tracks, noticed the steam coming off them, and started asking questions. He wanted to know why our vehicles were the only ones that made it out. Miller looked at me, and for a second, I thought he was going to tell the truth. I thought we were going to be heading to the stockade, but Miller just wiped his hands on a greasy rag and said, "Just luck, sir. I guess Detroit gave us the good ones." The major looked suspicious, but he didn't have any proof. He walked away, muttering something about a formal investigation into the mechanical failures of the other units. That night, Miller and I sat in the back of the truck. He handed me that little brass shim. He'd used it as a spacer for the heat exchange pipe. He told me he'd made a few extras just in case. He said, "Henry, the world is run by people who like things to be neat and tidy. But war isn't neat. Life isn't tidy. Sometimes you have to be a little bit illegal just to stay human." I didn't fully understand what he meant then. I was 20 years old and just wanted to see my mother again. But now, at 92, I think about Miller more than I think about any of the generals. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. We spent the rest of the winter in those trucks. Every time we stopped, we had to be careful. We'd wait until the officers were in their briefings before Miller would sneak out to maintain his forbidden invention. We became the go-to unit for scouting missions because the commanders knew our trucks miraculously always started. They started calling us the Lucky Third. They thought we had some kind of divine protection. We let them think that. It was easier than explaining the copper pipes and the rerouted exhaust. There was one time, though, where we almost got caught. We were near the German border, and a group of technicians from the Ordnance Department came up to the front. They were there to study the performance of the M3 in winter conditions. They were the guys who had designed the things. They had clipboards, stopwatches, and those arrogant expressions people get when they think they're the smartest person in the room. They started poking around Miller's truck. I remember watching from a distance, my heart hammering against my ribs. One of the engineers, a tall guy with spectacles, pointed to the canvas wrapping around the exhaust manifold. He asked Miller what it was for. My breath caught in my throat. Miller didn't even blink. He told the guy it was a vibration dampener he'd fashioned because the factory mounts were rattling loose. He even showed the guy a loose bolt on the frame to prove his point. The engineer nodded, wrote something down on his clipboard about field expedient repairs for structural vibration, and moved on. Miller looked at me and winked. It was the closest we ever came to the truth being revealed. The thing about Miller's mod wasn't just that it worked. It was that it gave us a sense of agency. In the Army, you're just a number. You're told what to wear, where to stand, and when to die. Everything is standardized. Your rifle, your boots, your thoughts. But that illegal modification was ours. It was a piece of us fighting back against a system that was often more interested in the proper procedure than the lives of the men in the mud. It was a small act of rebellion that kept us alive. As the spring of '45 rolled around and the weather started to turn, we didn't need the heat exchange anymore. Miller took the pipes off and buried them in a field outside a town called Aachen. He didn't want to leave any evidence behind when the war ended. He knew that once the fighting stopped, the luck would be scrutinized. We went back to being a standard unit with standard equipment, but the bond between us was different. We were the keepers of the secret. We knew that we'd survived not because of the might of the industrial complex, but because of a scrawny kid with a wrench who wasn't afraid to break the rules. I lost track of Miller after the war. We all went our separate ways, trying to bury the sounds of the mortars and the smell of the mud under the suburban dreams of the 50s. I heard he went back to Detroit, probably opened his own shop. I like to think he spent the rest of his life fixing things that weren't supposed to be fixed, making the world run just a little bit better than the official designs intended. I kept that brass shim, though. It was stuck in the pocket of my field jacket when I was discharged. I found it years later, and I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Looking back now, I realized that the illegal secret wasn't just about the truck engines. It was about the realization that the people in charge don't always have the answers. Sometimes, the person who knows best is the one standing right next to you in the rain. We spend so much of our lives following the manuals, trying to fit into the boxes people build for us. But when the world gets cold and the official ways start to fail, it's the innovators, the rule breakers, and the illegal thinkers who keep the engine running. I'm an old man now. Most of the men I served with are gone. The half-tracks are rusting in museums or buried under parking lots in Europe. The war is just a series of chapters in a history book for most people. But for me, it's still right here. It's in the way my joints ache when the rain starts, and it's in that little brass shim in my drawer. I tell this story because I want people to know that history isn't just made by the big names. It's made by the Millers of the world. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember one night, right before we crossed the Rhine. The air was crisp, and for the first time in months, the ground wasn't a swamp. We were sitting on the hood of the truck, looking at the stars. Miller was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Henry, do you think they'll ever realize?" I asked him what he meant. He said, "The engineers? The generals? Do you think they'll ever realize that we had to fix their mistakes just to stay alive? Or will they just write a book saying the M3 was a masterpiece of American engineering?" I told him they'd probably write the book, and they did. If you look up the history of the M3 half-track, you'll read about its versatility, its speed, and its contribution to the victory in Europe. You won't read about the fuel lines freezing. You won't read about the men who died because the official design couldn't handle a Belgian winter. And you certainly won't read about Corporal Miller and his illegal copper pipes. But I know, and now you know. Every time I see a piece of machinery that looks too perfect, I think about what's hidden under the hood. I think about the grease and the forbidden welds. There's a certain honesty in a field expedient repair. It doesn't care about looking good or following the rules. It only cares about one thing, working. And in the end, that's all that matters. Whether it's a truck engine or a human life, the goal is to keep moving forward, even when the world says you should be standing still. I'm 92 years old, and I've seen a lot of changes. I've seen the world get faster, shinier, and more official than ever. Everything has a manual now. Everything has a sensor and a safety switch. But I wonder, if things got cold again, really cold, would we still have the Millers? Would we still have people who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty and break a few rules to save their friends? I hope so. Because all the official designs in the world won't save you when the fog rolls in and the rumble of the enemy starts coming over the hill. I think about Sam sometimes, the buddy I lost because his truck wouldn't start. I wonder what would have happened if Miller had gotten to his vehicle first. Maybe Sam would be sitting in an armchair like this one, telling his own stories to his grandkids. It's a thought that stings, even after all these years. It's why I carry a bit of guilt along with the pride. We were the lucky ones, the illegal ones. And sometimes, luck is just another word for a modification the brass didn't know about. I'm finally telling this because I don't want the secret to die with me. I want someone to know that we weren't just soldiers. We were problem solvers. We were men who refused to be victims of a design flaw. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. When the war ended and I finally got back to my small town, people asked me what it was like. They wanted to hear about the big battles, the medals, the parades. I told them some of it, but I never told them about the copper pipes. I never told them that my life was saved by a scrawny kid from Detroit and a breach of military protocol. I guess I was still a little afraid of the major and his investigation, but the major is long gone now, and the lucky third has faded into the mist of time. I look at that brass shim and I feel a sense of peace. It's a small, ugly thing, but it represents the best of us. The part of us that survives. The part of us that looks at a broken world and says, I can fix this. It doesn't need a medal. It doesn't need a mention in a history book. It just needs to work. And it did. It worked long enough to get me home. As I sit here, watching the sun go down, I think about the many illegal secrets being kept right now by people who are just trying to get through the day. Maybe it's a teacher who's ignoring a bad curriculum to actually help a student. Maybe it's a doctor who's cutting through red tape to save a patient. The official design is rarely perfect. It's the modifications we make, the small, quiet, forbidden choices that make life worth living. I'm Henry Lawson, and I was just a corporal in a war that changed the world. But I was also a witness to a little bit of magic under the hood of a half-track, and that's a memory I'll hold on to until the very end. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. It's funny how time works. You spend your youth trying to follow the rules so you don't get in trouble, and then you spend your old age realizing that the times you broke the rules were the times you were most alive. If I could go back and talk to that 20-year-old version of myself, shivering in the mud, I'd tell him not to worry so much about the major. I'd tell him to trust Miller. I'd tell him that the most important thing he'll ever carry isn't his rifle, but his ability to think for himself. The world keeps turning, and new designs come and go. But the human spirit? That doesn't change. It's always going to be a little bit messy, a little bit illegal, and a whole lot more resilient than any engineer could ever predict. I'm glad I finally shared this. It feels like I've finally taken that copper pipe out from under the canvas and let it see the sun. It's not a secret anymore. It's just the truth. And the truth, much like Miller's mod, is what keeps us going when everything else fails. I think I'll close that drawer now. The light is fading, and my eyes aren't what they used to be, but I don't need to see the shim to know it's there. I can feel it. It's part of me, just like the mud of Belgium, the cold of the Ardennes, and the grin on Miller's face. We did what we had to do. We survived. And in the end, that's the only design that really matters. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Would you like me to continue expanding the narrative to reach the full character count? I can go into more specific details of the individual missions, the dialogue between the men, and the technical struggles they faced during the final push into Germany. After Miller buried those pipes outside of Aachen, I thought that was the end of it. I thought we'd go back to being just another cog in the great American machine, following the rules and hoping for the best. But you don't just walk away from a secret like that. It changes how you look at everything. It changes how you look at the men in charge and the equipment they give you. We were moving deeper into Germany by then, and the air was changing. It wasn't just the cold anymore. It was the smell of a collapsing empire. Smoke, wet stone, and that pervasive sour scent of desperation. We were assigned to a small town near the Rhine. The name's gone now, lost in the shuffle of 80 years. But I remember the cobblestones. They were slick with a mixture of melted snow and oil. Our half-track, now back to its factory standard configuration, felt sluggish. It felt like it was fighting me. Miller stayed quiet mostly, but I'd see him looking at the engine block with a sort of mourning in his eyes. He knew what that machine was capable of when it was allowed to breathe, when it was freed from the constraints of a manual written 3,000 miles away by someone who had never seen a tracer round. The major, the one who'd been suspicious back in Belgium, was still riding our heels. He'd been promoted, likely on the back of our unit's miraculous performance during the retreat. He had this idea that we were a crack unit by design, not by desperation. He started giving us the missions no one else wanted. The lucky third can handle it, he'd say, puffing out his chest. He didn't realize that our luck had been buried in a hole in the dirt near Aachen. We were just as vulnerable as everyone else now, maybe more so, because we were carrying the weight of an expectation we couldn't fulfill anymore. I remember a night in late March. We were tasked with scouting a bridgehead. The official orders were precise. Stay on the main road, maintain a steady speed, and report back every 20 minutes. But anyone who'd been in the mud for more than a week knew that the main road was where the 88s were zeroed in. Miller leaned over to me in the dark and whispered, "The book is going to get us killed tonight, Henry." He was right. If we followed those orders to the letter, we were as good as gone. But we didn't have his modification anymore. We were at the mercy of the official design. We started the engine. It took 3 tries. That old familiar dread crawled up my spine. Rrrr, click. Nothing. Rrrr, click. On the third try, it caught, but it sounded thin, like a man trying to cough through a chest cold. We pulled out onto the road, the metal of the half-track groaning under the weight of the gear. Every time the engine sputtered, my heart skipped a beat. We were driving into the mouth of the wolf, and our teeth had been pulled. About 2 miles in, we hit a patch of soft ground that wasn't on the map. The official tires, the ones the ordnance department swore were superior to anything the Germans had, started spinning. We were sinking. In the old days, with the Miller mod, we could have pushed the RPMs high enough to torque our way out without the engine stalling out from the heat. Now, we were just a sitting duck in the middle of a dark road in enemy territory. I looked at Miller. He didn't say a word. He just got out, grabbed a shovel, and started digging in the freezing mud. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. We spent an hour in that ditch, every sound in the woods sounding like a German patrol. We were whispering, our breaths blooming in the cold air like ghosts. I kept thinking about Sam. I kept thinking about how many men were lying in graves because a bolt was too short or a fuel line was too thin. When we finally got that hunk of metal back on the solid road, we were exhausted and covered in filth. We hadn't even reached the bridgehead yet, and we were already defeated. We decided right then and there that we weren't going to die for the manual. We turned off the road, ignored the report-in schedule, and moved through the tree line. It was slow, agonizing work. We were breaking every rule in the book, but we were alive. When we finally saw the bridge, we realized the official intelligence was wrong. The Germans hadn't abandoned it. They'd mined it and had a Panther tank sitting in wait. If we'd stayed on that main road at the steady speed the Major ordered, we'd have been scrap metal before we even saw the water. We crept back, reaching the assembly area just before dawn. The Major was waiting, checking his watch. He started screaming about the missed reports, about the unauthorized route we took. He threatened to strip us of our rank. Miller just stood there, staring through him. Finally, Miller spoke up. He didn't mention the mod. He didn't mention the pipes. He just said, "Sir, the road was a trap. Your map was wrong. The engine almost quit twice. If you want to court-martial us for staying alive, you go right ahead. But the bridge is still standing and it's guarded by a Panther." The Major turned red, but he stopped shouting. He knew he couldn't explain away 40 dead men if he'd forced us to stay on that road. He dismissed us, but the look he gave us told me the luck had run out. We were no longer the Golden Boys. We were just troublemakers who knew too much. That was the thing about the war. You were a hero as long as you were useful, but the moment you started pointing out the cracks in the foundation, you were a liability. A few days later, we were moving through a captured German depot. It was a mess of twisted iron and burnt rubber. Miller was poking through the wreckage of a German Opel truck. He called me over. He pointed to a small bypass valve on the German fuel system. It was a simple thing, elegant in its own way. "Look at this, Henry," he said. "They did it at the factory. What I spent all winter trying to build with scrap copper, they just built into the truck." He sat down on a crate and laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of a man realizing that the enemy had solved the problem while our own people were still denying the problem existed. It made me angry. It made me want to scream at the sky. We were told we had the best of everything. We were told American industry was the pinnacle of human achievement. And yet, here was a defeated enemy truck with a design feature that could have saved Sam's life. Miller tucked the valve into his pocket. "A souvenir," he called it. But I knew it was more than that. It was proof. It was a reminder that the illegal secret wasn't just a field repair. It was a necessary correction to a system that was too arrogant to admit it was wrong. By the time we crossed into the heart of Germany, the war was winding down, but the danger hadn't changed. Snipers were everywhere. Young boys and old men with nothing left to lose, hiding in the ruins of their homes. We were still in that same half-track, the one that hated the cold and struggled with the mud. Every morning was a gamble. Every time I turned the key, I felt a weight in my chest. Miller had stopped tinkering. He'd become withdrawn. He'd done his part. He'd saved his friends. And now he was just waiting for the clock to run out. I remember we came across a group of displaced persons, people who had been liberated from the camps or forced from their homes. They were walking skeletons, their eyes filled with a hollow light that I still see when I close my eyes. We stopped the truck to give them some of our rations. An old woman came up to the side of the vehicle and put her hand on the cold metal. She looked at the white star painted on the door and then looked at me. She didn't speak English, but she didn't have to. She was thanking us for being there, and I felt like a fraud. I felt like the star on that door represented a perfection that didn't exist. We were riding in a flawed machine, led by men who valued procedure over people. And yet to this woman, we were the light of the world. It's a strange thing, carrying that kind of burden. You want to be the hero she thinks you are, but you know the truth. You know about the copper pipes buried in the mud. You know about the men who didn't make it because their official engines wouldn't start. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. We reached the LB in April. The war was effectively over for us, though we didn't know it yet. The tension began to bleed out, replaced by a strange, hollow exhaustion. We spent our days cleaning our gear and staring across the water. Miller spent his time sitting by the engine, not fixing it, just being near it. I think he was trying to reconcile the man he was before the war with the man who had to become a criminal to survive it. One evening he came to me with a piece of paper. It was a diagram he'd drawn from memory. It was the Miller mod, laid out in perfect detail, with notes on the metallurgy and the flow rates. He handed it to me. "Keep this," he said. "Maybe one day someone will actually listen. Maybe one day they won't wait for a war to realize that the men in the field know more than the men in the offices." I took it, but I didn't know what to do with it. I was just a kid from a small town. Who was I going to tell? When the surrender finally came, there wasn't a big celebration in our unit. We just kind of sat there. There was a sense of relief, sure, but there was also a profound sadness. We'd seen too much. We knew the cost of every mile we'd gained. We knew the names of the men who were supposed to be sitting there with us, sharing a bottle of captured schnapps. The Lucky Third was smaller than it had been in Normandy, a lot smaller. The process of demobilization was a blur of paperwork and boredom. They stripped our vehicles of everything that wasn't official issue. If there had been any trace left of Miller's work, they would have found it then. But the pipes were miles away, and the secret was tucked away in our minds. I remember watching our half-track being driven onto a transport ship. It looked so ordinary, just another piece of surplus equipment heading back to a depot to be melted down or sold to a farmer. No one would ever know the lives that had been saved inside that steel hull. On the boat ride back across the Atlantic, the atmosphere was different. The fear was gone, replaced by a frantic sort of hope. Men were talking about their girls, their jobs, the cars they were going to buy. But Miller and I, we stayed on the deck watching the waves. We didn't talk about the future. We talked about the cold. We talked about the way the engine sounded when it finally caught on a sub-zero morning. We talked about the illegal secret like it was the only thing that had been real in the last 2 years. When we hit the docks in New York, the noise was overwhelming. The music, the shouting, the ticker tape. It was like a different planet. I lost Miller in the crowd. We shook hands, promised to write, and then the tide of people pulled us apart. I never did write. I think we both knew that seeing each other would just bring back the smell of the diesel and the sound of the 88s. We needed to be different people now. We needed to be the official version of ourselves again. I went back home, got a job at the local mill, married a girl named Sarah, and started a life. For years, I didn't think about the war, or I tried not to. But then winter would come. The first frost would hit the ground, and I'd be right back in the Hurtgen forest. I'd be standing by the hood of a half-track, praying for the starter to engage. I'd see Miller's soot-stained face and hear him laughing about destruction of government property. In the 1960s, I saw an article in a technical magazine. It was about innovations in cold weather engine performance. They were talking about a new system for rerouting exhaust heat to prevent fuel icing. They called it a breakthrough. They credited a team of engineers in California. I sat there at my kitchen table and cried. Not because I wanted the credit, but because it had taken them 20 years to invent something a corporal with a wrench had figured out in a freezing ditch in 1944. I thought about calling the magazine. I thought about sending them Miller's diagram, but I didn't. What would be the point? The war was over. The men were gone. The illegal secret had done its job. It had kept me alive to grow old and gray. That was its only purpose. It wasn't meant for a magazine or a patent office. It was meant for the mud. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm 92 now, and my memory is like an old radio. Sometimes the signal is clear, and sometimes it's just static. But the illegal secret, that's always clear. It's the most honest thing I've ever known. It's a reminder that the world is built on the backs of people who do what needs to be done, regardless of the rules. I often wonder how many other secrets like that are buried in the history books. How many other illegal modifications saved lives in the Pacific or in Korea or in Vietnam? We hear the official stories, the ones sanitized for the public, but the real history, the raw, greasy, rule-breaking history, is usually kept in the hearts of the men who were there. It's a history of survival, not strategy. I've lived a long life. I've seen my children grow, and my grandchildren, and now my great-grandchildren. They look at me and they see a hero. They see the medals in the shadow box on the wall, but they don't see the copper pipes. They don't see the brass shim. They don't see the fear in a young man's eyes when he realizes the system he trusted is broken, and maybe that's for the best. You don't want your children to know how fragile the world really is. You want them to believe in the official design. But every now and then, when I'm talking to my grandson, the one who's always taking things apart to see how they work, I see a bit of Miller in him. I see that spark of curiosity, that refusal to accept that things have to be the way they are just because a manual says so. And I tell him, don't be afraid to break the rules, son. Just make sure you're breaking them for the right reasons. Make sure you're breaking them to save someone or to make things better. And never, ever tell the major. He laughs, not really knowing what I mean, but I think he gets the gist of it. The older I get, the more I realize that the war wasn't about the grand movements on a map. It was about the small moments. It was about the way a cigarette tasted in the dark. It was about the weight of a friend's hand on your shoulder. And it was about the illegal secret that turned a death trap into a lifeline. We weren't just fighting the Germans. We were fighting the cold, the mud, and the limitations of our own creation. I sometimes wonder what happened to that German Opel truck Miller found. I wonder if the driver of that truck had his own illegal modifications. I wonder if he was sitting in a ditch somewhere, cursing his own generals and his own manuals. War is a strange thing. It strips away everything until you're just a human being trying to stay warm and stay alive. The lines on the map don't matter as much as the heat in the engine. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm tired now. Telling these stories takes a lot out of me. It's like opening a door to a room I've kept locked for a long time. The air in there is heavy and the light is dim, but it's important to open it. It's important to let the stories out before the room is empty for good. I hope Miller found peace. I hope he's somewhere where the engines always start on the first try and the manuals are actually written by people who know what they're talking about. I hope he knows that I never forgot him. He was a scrawny kid from Detroit, and he was the greatest engineer I ever met. He didn't have a degree, but he had a heart that wouldn't let his friends die because of a design flaw. I'm going to sit here for a while longer and watch the shadows stretch across the floor. I'll think about the Hurtgen and the Rhine and the smell of the diesel. I'll think about the lucky third and the secret we carried across an ocean. It's a good memory despite the pain. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always a way to fix what's broken. You just have to be brave enough to pick up the wrench and ignore the rules. That brass shim in my drawer, I think I'll leave it there for my grandson to find. Maybe he'll look at it and wonder what it was for. Maybe he'll feel the weight of it and realize it's more than just a scrap of metal. Or maybe he'll just throw it away. Either way, it's done its job. It got me here. It gave me 92 years of life that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And that's a pretty good deal for a piece of illegal brass. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I think back to the last time I saw Miller. We were standing in the rain in New York, the city lights reflecting in the puddles. He looked at me and said, "Henry, don't ever let them tell you it was just the equipment. It was us. It was always us." He was right. The machines are just steel and rubber. It's the people inside them that matter. It's the choices we make when the manual fails. It's the illegal secrets we keep to protect each other. That's the real story of the war. Not the bombs, not the bullets, but the humanity that survived despite it all. The humanity that rerouted the exhaust heat and buried the pipes in the mud. I'm glad I got to tell you about it. It's been a long journey, from that ditch in Belgium to this armchair, but I wouldn't change a thing, except maybe I'd have saved Sam. I'd have given anything to save Sam. But you can't fix everything. You just fix what you can and carry the rest with you. The winter of 1944 didn't just arrive, it collided with us. People talk about the Battle of the Bulge like it was a single event, a moment in a history book. But for us, it was a blur of gray skies, white snow, and the black skeletal fingers of frozen trees. We were pushed back into the woods near Bastogne, and that's where the official design of our equipment really started to show its teeth. Not the kind of teeth that bite the enemy, but the kind that sink into your own throat. The Army had issued us these heavy wool overcoats that looked great on a mannequin in Washington. But once they got wet, they weighed 40 pounds and never dried out. Everything was like that. The boots leaked, the rations were frozen solid, and the vehicles, Lord, the vehicles. The M3 half-track was supposed to be the pinnacle of American mobility. It had the tracks of a tank and the front end of a truck, designed to take us anywhere. But the engineers who designed the cooling system had clearly never imagined a world where the temperature stayed below zero for 3 weeks straight. The radiators were too efficient for their own good. They'd pull in that freezing air, and before the engine could even reach operating temperature, the coolant would turn to slush. Then the pressure would build, a hose would pop, and you were dead in the water. I saw men crying, not from the shells, but from the sheer helplessness of watching their only way out of the woods turn into a useless hunk of iron. Miller was working double shifts then. He didn't have a garage. He had a tarp and a flashlight that he had to keep covered with his coat so the snipers wouldn't see the glow. He was still running his bypass lines, but he'd taken it a step further. He'd found a way to use the heat from the oil pan to keep the battery warm. Batteries in that cold were notorious for losing their charge. You'd go to start the engine, and all you'd get was a dying groan. Miller's illegal wiring meant our batteries stayed topped off. We were the only ones who didn't have to jumpstart our trucks using a tank. One afternoon, a colonel from division came by. He was looking for a vehicle to ferry some wounded out of a pocket that was being closed off by the 2nd Panzer Division. He looked at the motor pool, rows of frozen half-tracks with their hoods up and frustrated mechanics swearing at the sky. Then he saw our truck. It was idling quietly, a thin wisp of white steam coming from the exhaust, looking for all the world like it was a summer day in Georgia. He walked over, his boots crunching in the frozen crust of the snow. "Corporal," he said to Miller, "how is it your vehicle is the only one in this entire battalion that seems to be functioning?" I felt my heart drop into my stomach. Miller wiped a hand across his forehead, leaving a streak of black grease. He didn't stand at attention, he just leaned against the fender. "Just lucky, Colonel," he said, in that flat Detroit drawl of his. "I guess I just treat her better than the other boys." The colonel wasn't an idiot. He walked around to the front, squinting at the grill. He noticed that we'd blocked off half the radiator with pieces of cardboard and old ammunition crates, another illegal field mod. "You're running hot, son. You'll blow a head gasket." "She's running just fine, sir," Miller replied, his voice steady. "Better to blow a gasket in a mile than to freeze to death right here." The colonel looked at him for a long time. He knew. He had to know. He could see the non-standard hoses peeking out. But he looked back at the line of ambulances filled with boys who were bleeding out into the straw, and he made a choice. He didn't ask to see under the hood. He just nodded. "Get those men to the aid station, Corporal. And if I see this truck again, I expect it to be just as lucky as it is right now." If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. We loaded those boys up. Some of them were so young they didn't even have hair on their faces yet. They were shivering, their skin a pale, waxy blue. As we drove away from the front, the engine hummed. It was a different sound than the other trucks. It was deeper, more rhythmic. Miller had tuned it by ear, ignoring the factory settings for the carburetor. He'd leaned out the fuel mixture because he knew the cold air was denser. It was a delicate balance. Too lean and you'd burn the valves, too rich and you'd foul the plugs. But Miller knew exactly where the sweet spot was. We hit a stretch of road that was under intermittent mortar fire. The official procedure was to stop, dismount, and wait for the barrage to end. But Miller didn't stop. He knew that if he let the engine idle for too long, the heat soak would trigger a vapor lock in the fuel lines. He kept his foot on the gas, weaving through the craters. I was in the passenger seat, gripping the door handle so hard my knuckles were white. Every time a shell landed nearby, the shock wave would rock the truck, but the engine never faltered. It felt like we were riding in a ghost, a machine that didn't belong to the Army anymore, but to us. We reached the aid station just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. The medics swarmed the back of the truck, pulling the stretchers out. One of the boys, a kid named Peterson from Ohio, grabbed my sleeve as they lifted him. "Lawson," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "The truck, it didn't stop. I thought for sure it would stop." I didn't know what to say to him. I just patted his hand and watched them carry him into the tent. Miller stayed in the cab, his hands still on the wheel. He looked older than he was. The war does that to you, but the weight of the secret did it faster. He knew that every time we succeeded, we were proving the high-ranking engineers wrong. And in the Army, there's nothing more dangerous than being right when your superiors are wrong. As we were headed back to our unit, we ran into a convoy that had been ambushed. 2 deuce-and-a-halfs were burning in the road, and a third was tilted into a ditch. A young lieutenant was standing there, looking lost. He saw us and waved us down. He wanted us to tow his truck out. "I can't, sir," Miller said. "We're on a priority mission." It was a lie, but Miller knew that the extra strain of towing a 2.5-ton truck through that mud would probably kill our modified engine. The lieutenant got angry. "That's an order, Corporal. This truck is carrying essential communication equipment." Miller looked at the lieutenant, then at the burning wrecks, then at our hood. He knew that the official tow capacity of the M3 was enough to handle it, but the official tow capacity didn't account for the fact that we were running on a prayer and scavenged parts. He sighed, got out, and hooked up the tow cable. We pulled. The engine roared, a sound like a wounded animal. I could smell the clutch burning, that acrid, scorched hair smell that stays in your nose for days. The half-track groaned, the tracks digging into the frozen earth, throwing up clods of dirt and ice. Slowly, painfully, the truck in the ditch started to move. We got it onto the road, but as soon as we did, our engine gave a sharp pop and died. Smoke started pouring out from under the hood. The lieutenant didn't even say thank you. He just hopped into his truck, started it up. Lucky for him, his engine hadn't frozen yet, and drove off. Miller didn't scream. He didn't curse. He just walked to the front of the truck and opened the hood. The bypass hose he'd fashioned from the brewery copper had burst. The pressure had been too much. We were stranded in the middle of a road that the Germans were likely zeroing in on, with a dead engine and a broken secret. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. "Help me with the tarp," Miller said, his voice completely calm. We draped the canvas over the front of the truck to hide the light, and he went to work. He didn't have a spare hose. He had to cut the damaged section out and join the ends using a piece of a discarded C-ration tin and some wire. His fingers were shaking from the cold, and he kept dropping his pliers into the snow. I stood watch, my rifle at the ready, peering into the darkness. Every snap of a twig sounded like a Mauser bolt being thrown. "Almost got it," he muttered. He was working by touch now. He'd spent so many hours in the guts of that machine that he knew every bolt, every curve of the block. He was like a surgeon working in the dark. Suddenly we heard it, the clank, clank, clank of metal on metal, a tank. And it wasn't the high-pitched squeal of a Sherman. It was the heavy rhythmic thud of a Tiger. It was coming up the road from the direction we'd just come. "Miller," I whispered, "we gotta go, now." "2 more minutes," he said, his voice strained. He was tightening the wire around the tin can patch. The sound got louder. The ground started to vibrate. I could see the silhouette of the monster rounding the bend, its long 88mm gun barrel poking into the moonlight like a finger of death. It was about 400 yards away. "Miller!" He slammed the hood down. "Get in!" I jumped into the passenger seat. He hit the starter. Rrrr, click. Nothing. The sound was like a physical blow to my chest. Rrrr, click. The Tiger stopped. They'd heard us. I saw the turret start to traverse, slow and deliberate, the gears whining in the cold air. "Come on, you beautiful disaster," Miller hissed. He wasn't talking to the Army. He was talking to the machine. He was talking to the ghost of his own ingenuity. He hit it again. The engine coughed. A cloud of black smoke erupted from the exhaust. It sputtered, died, then roared to life. He didn't wait for it to warm up. He slammed it into gear and floored it. The first shell from the Tiger whistled over our heads, the vacuum of its passage rocking the truck. It impacted a tree behind us, showered us with splinters and frozen needles. Miller was driving like a madman, taking the corners on 2 wheels, pushing the modified engine way beyond its limits. The patch he'd made was leaking. I could see the steam rising through the gaps in the floorboards, but it held. We made it into the cover of the woods, just as a second shell exploded in the road where we'd been sitting seconds before. We didn't stop until we were 5 miles away. When we finally pulled over, the engine was glowing, literally glowing. The manifold was a dull cherry red. Miller leaned his head back against the seat and started to laugh. It was a high, wheezing sound. "Official design," he gasped. My foot. We sat there in the dark, the engine ticking as it cooled, the steam slowly dissipating. We were alive. We were illegal. We were broken, and we were completely exhausted. But we were alive. And that was the only design that mattered. The next morning, we were back in the motor pool. Miller had replaced the tin can patch with another piece of copper he'd been hiding in his bedroll. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands were a map of small cuts and burns. The major came by, the one who'd been on our case since Belgium. He looked at the truck, then at Miller. "I heard you had a close call last night, Corporal," the major said. "Just a bit of engine trouble, sir," Miller replied. "Fixed it right up." The major walked over to the hood. My heart stopped. He reached out and put his hand on the metal. It was still warm. He looked at Miller, then at me. He was a career soldier, a man who believed in the chain of command and the sanctity of the regulations. But he also knew that the Tiger tank that had been prowling that road had been found destroyed by a P-47 later that morning. And the report from the lieutenant mentioned a lucky half-track that had provided a tow under fire. "Keep it running, Miller," the major said quietly. He didn't open the hood. He just turned and walked away. That was the moment I realized that even the men who uphold the system know when the system is failing. They just can't say it out loud. They need the illegals to do the things they aren't allowed to do. They need the Millers to keep the world turning while they keep the paperwork straight. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The rest of the winter was a long, slow grind. We lost more men to the cold than to the Germans. Frostbite took toes and fingers, and the constant damp turned every scratch into an infection. But our half-track never failed us again. Miller wouldn't let it. He became obsessed with it, talking to the engine like it was a living thing. He'd found a way to filter the motor oil using old socks and fine sand, keeping the lubrication clean long after the official filters had clogged with sludge. I remember one night we were sharing a tin of cold beans. Miller looked at me and said, "You know what they'll do after the war, Henry? They'll take all these trucks and they'll park them in a field. They'll look at the records and see how many hours they ran, and they'll say, 'Look at how great our engineers were.' They'll never know about the socks. They'll never know about the copper pipes." "I'll know," I said. "Yeah," he smiled. "You'll know, but you're just an infantryman. Nobody listens to the infantry." He was right in a way. The history of the war is written by the people who weren't there, or the people who were so high up they couldn't see the grease under the fingernails of the men doing the work. They write about the arsenal of democracy and the industrial might of America. And don't get me wrong, that stuff was important. We wouldn't have won without the factories, but the factories didn't win the war. The men who fixed the factory's mistakes in a frozen ditch won the war. When we finally crossed the border into Germany, the mood changed. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about finishing the job. The roads were better, and the weather started to turn. We didn't need the heat bypass as much, but Miller kept it on. He didn't trust the sun any more than he trusted the army. We came across a German repair depot near the city of Cologne. It had been hit by an airstrike, and the ground was littered with parts. Miller was like a kid in a candy store. He found a crate of Bosch fuel injectors that were light years ahead of what we were using. He spent a whole afternoon figuring out how to adapt them to our engine. "Is that even possible?" I asked him as I watched him file down a mounting bracket. "Anything's possible if you don't care about the warranty," he joked. By the time he was done, that half-track sounded like a race car. It had more power, better fuel economy, and it didn't smoke. It was a hybrid, American iron and German precision, held together by a Detroit mechanic's stubbornness. We could outrun a Jeep on the flat stretches. It was a beautiful, illegal masterpiece. But the end was coming. We could feel it. The German resistance was crumbling, and we were moving faster and faster. We were liberating towns every day, seeing the white sheets hanging from the windows. The fear that had been our constant companion for months began to lift, replaced by a strange kind of numbness. I remember the day the war ended for us. We were parked in a town square, and the news came over the radio. People were cheering, throwing flowers, hugging each other. Miller just sat on the bumper of the truck, cleaning his tools. He looked at the engine, then at me. "Time to take it all off, Henry," he said. "Why?" I asked. The war's over. Who cares now? The inspectors care, he said. They're going to be looking at these vehicles for the return trip. If they see what I've done, they'll call it sabotage or some other nonsense. They don't like it when you improve on their perfection. We spent the next 2 days stripping the truck back to its official state. We took off the copper pipes, the Bosch injectors, the battery heaters, and the oil filters made of socks. We put back the factory standard hoses and the official carburetor settings. By the time we were done, the truck looked exactly like every other M3 in the battalion. But when we started it up, it sounded wrong. It sounded weak. It sounded like the official design was a shadow of what the machine could really be. It was a sad sound. The sound of a rebel being forced back into a uniform. Miller took all the modified parts and put them in a wooden crate. We drove out to a field near the Elbe River and we buried it. We didn't mark the spot. We just covered it with dirt and stones. Rest in peace, Miller said, patting the ground. I think about that crate sometimes. I wonder if it's still there, buried under a German wheat field. I wonder if some farmer ever dug it up and wondered what all those strange bits of copper and steel were for. Maybe he used them to fix his tractor. I'd like to think so. I'd like to think Miller's genius is still out there somewhere, keeping a machine running when it should have stopped. When I got home, I had a hard time adjusting to things. Everything was so clean. People followed the rules. They stopped at red lights. They bought things from catalogs and used them exactly as the instructions said. It felt wrong. I'd seen a world where the instructions were a lie and the rules were a death sentence. I remember I bought an old Ford truck in '48. It was a good truck, but the first time it wouldn't start on a cold morning, I didn't call a tow truck. I went into my garage, found some copper tubing, and I went to work. My wife thought I was crazy. She asked me why I wouldn't just take it to the dealership. Because the dealership doesn't know this truck like I do, I told her. I've spent my whole life modifying things. My lawnmower, my furnace, my kids' bicycles, I can't help it. Once you've seen the illegal secret, you can't unsee it. You realize that the world is just a collection of designs that are waiting for someone to make them better. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm 92 years old, and I'm sitting in this chair, and I'm looking at my hands. They're spotted with age, and the skin is thin like parchment, but I can still feel the wrench. I can still feel the vibration of that engine through the floorboards. I can still see Miller's face in the light of the flashlight, his eyes focused on the only thing that mattered, keeping us moving. I'm telling you this because I want you to remember that the next time you see a veteran, you aren't just looking at an old man in a hat. You're looking at a keeper of secrets. You're looking at someone who had to break the world to save it. We weren't just soldiers. We were creators. We were the illegals who outperformed every official design because we had to. Miller passed away about 10 years ago. I found out through a small notice in a Detroit newspaper. It didn't mention the war much. It just said he was a beloved husband and a master mechanic. It was a quiet end for a man who had done so much. But I know the truth. I know that there are 40 men, or their children and grandchildren, who are walking the earth today because of a scrawny kid who wasn't afraid to use a piece of brewery copper to fight the cold. I still have that brass shim. It's my connection to him. It's my connection to the truth. And as long as I'm alive, the illegal secret will live too. The sun is almost down now. The shadows are long and the house is quiet. I think I'll close my eyes for a bit. I'll think about the snow in the Ardennes and the sound of a Tiger tank in the dark and the way the engine roared to life when everything said it shouldn't. It's a good way to remember. It's a good way to live. I've lived long enough to know that the best designs aren't the ones on paper. They're the ones we carry in our hearts. They're the ones we build out of necessity and love. And they're the only ones that really last. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten.